Winger would rise to popularity in the late 80s and early 90s thanks to the strength of their first two albums, but a few short years later it all came crashing down. Today, let's explore whatever happened to Winger. Growing up in Colorado, Kip Winger was surrounded by music at a young age, having parents who were jazz musicians. In his youth, Kip, along with his brother, would play in a rock band while he was a student, and he would lie about his age so he could play at local venues with his older brother. They would call themselves the Wingerz. Kip would privately take classical piano and guitar with a Julliard trained teacher. At the age of 16, Kip attended ballet with his girlfriend, and it would be his first exposure to classical music, telling Billboard, "I thought, I'll try it. I'm always up for an adventure." We went in and I was completely transfixed. I heard this music coming out of the studio, and people were holding their leg over their heads like Bruce Lee, and I'm like, I'm in. I was hooked ever since. Kip would end up becoming a student of ballet and would continue to study the artistic dance well into his 30s. Kip would perform with the Colorado State Ballet Company in the early 80s before moving to New York to pursue a career in music in 1985. But even after moving to the Big Apple, ballet was never far from his mind, as he still found himself attending classes, revealing to the LA Times, "I even took classes with the Joffrey Ballet Company, but I only took classes. I wasn't part of the company. I used to play in a band all night and then go to the dance studio the next day from 10 to 3. At the age of 16, while still living in Colorado, Kip would end up meeting a producer named Beau Hill. At the time, Hill had a band called Airborne, who were signed to Sony-owned Columbia Records, and he was living in Denver. While Kip was playing with his brother's band, they had a manager who was a local DJ who met Beau backstage at a Heart concert, and he offered to produce the Wingerz. Hill would take an immediate liking to Kip, revealing in the book Nothing But a Good Time, "Kip is truly a very gifted guy, and I wanted to help him out as much as I could, so I would get Kip gigs." Hill would end up moving to New York, and Kip would end up following him there in 1985. One of Hill's artists he frequently worked with at the time was Alice Cooper, and it was that connection that got Kip the opportunity to play with Alice in the studio and go out on tour with him as his bassist. Alice Cooper would reveal in the same book, "I heard about Kip Winger from one of my producers. He said, I know this kid that plays bass that looks really good. We brought him into the studio and said, hey, why don't you come out and play bass with us? I never realized Kip was as creative as he was. He was a black belt in karate. He could score a movie. He could score a symphony. He took ballet, he'd remember." After Kip came off the road with Alice Cooper, Hill had him work on a Fiona record where he met guitarist Reb Beach. Hill would recall in the same book, "I introduced Reb and Kip, and I said, this could be the nucleus of a really great band." Reb Beach, for his part, had done 2 semesters of studying guitar at Boston's Berklee College of Music, but he cut his losses, revealing in the same book, "I was only there for 2 semesters because rock was frowned upon at the time. It was, you're holding the guitar the wrong way, you're holding the pick the wrong way, so I got in my car and drove away." Beach would head to New York City and took up a job as a singing waiter at a seafood restaurant located across the street from CBGB's. In his free time, Beach played guitar and would be a friend at a local music store who mentioned that Fiona was looking for a guitar player. Beach started to make a name for himself as a talented studio musician and was easy to work with. He would nab work with the Bee Gees, Chaka Khan, and Twisted Sister. It was during Kip's time with Alice Cooper that he was working on demos to pitch to record labels to get signed as a solo artist. After clicking with Kip, Beach would end up playing on his demos, which by his own admission were heavily influenced by Peter Gabriel. Kip had also written some stuff with Alice Cooper keyboardist Paul Taylor during their time on the road together, and he would suggest himself, Taylor, and Beach record together, form their own band, and go get a recording contract and try to make it on their own. Eventually, Kip would quit Alice Cooper, and by 1987, himself and Beach would move into Beau Hill's apartment in Hoboken, New Jersey, and commit to not taking any outside work for 6 months while they wrote more songs and shopped around for a label deal. By this point in time, they'd already written 17 and Time to Surrender, and Hill would use his connections at Atlantic Records to try and get the band a deal, recalling in the same book, "I took some songs to Doug Morris and I played them. He listened to the band and he said, no, this is crap. So I went back to Kip and said, Doug didn't like these, do some more." They'd write some stuff and I'd go back to Doug and I would change the name of the band so Doug wouldn't think I was still pitching the same band over and over again. Eventually, he agreed to sign the band after hearing the track State of Emergency. However, once Doug Morris learned of what Beau Hill had done, he got pretty pissed off, so Kip's band was never officially signed to Atlantic, instead signed to a production deal with Beau Hill. It would result in the band making a lot less money than their peers, as Hill took a significant portion of their earnings. It would be Doug Morris who suggested that the band be named Winger, and Kip would recall in the same book, "I hated it because I didn't even want to be the namesake of the band. I wasn't into having it be like a Bon Jovi, but I asked Alice Cooper about it and he said, 'That's a great band name.' I still hate the name," he'd say. Released in 1988, Winger's self-titled debut album initially performed poorly. Within the first month, the album sold about 16,000 copies. To support the record, the band skipped clubs and small venues and immediately started playing arenas, opening for the Scorpions. The group almost got fired after their first date of the tour, as they had limited experience playing live, and it showed. But by the second show, things had improved and the band spent several months on the road with the German band. Winger almost never got the opportunity to make a music video for their debut record. Back then, it was pretty expensive to shoot music videos, and Winger had to audition in front of several Atlantic representatives to see if they were worthy of getting the money to do a video. That's when Kip's ballet training came in handy, and they soon secured $90,000 to shoot their first video for the single Madeleine. MTV would play the video at 3 a.m. on Headbangers Ball, and the momentum had finally shifted the band's way. Add to that the single Headed for a Heartbreak in 2017, and their debut album would become a big seller, going platinum in America. While the single 17 would be a massive hit, the subject matter of the song wouldn't sit well with some of the members decades later. Kip would reveal in the same book, "It was a riff that Reb wrote. I stole the title from Kingdom Come. They had an album out and there's a song on their record called 17, so I stole the title and wrote a song." Meanwhile, Paul Taylor would recall, "Kip's thing was, hey man, you know the Beatles had a song about being 17? Of course now we'd probably all look back and go, okay, we probably should call it something else," he'd say. Despite the band's success, more people seemed focused on frontman Kip Winger than the group's actual music, frustrating the musicians. Kip would tell the Morning Call newspaper, "A band like Metallica, people find them to be very serious about what they do. Why not Winger?" Meanwhile, he would tell the Chicago Tribune he wasn't comfortable being the sole focus of the band, telling the paper, "I don't want to shove the way I look down people's throats. I know that people think I'm some great-looking guy who wants to put my face everywhere. I try to play it down." Hence why the band's first two albums don't feature Kip's face on them. Even his interactions with fans would focus on personal details of his life, with him telling the Tribune that he'd frequently get letters asking him if he had a girlfriend, what his real name was, and what type of shampoo he uses. The tabloids didn't help much either, as Kip was linked to model Rachel Hunter. It created fodder for the rag mags, and Hunter would eventually marry Rod Stewart. He would tell the Tribune, "That whole situation just got out of control, especially in the European press. Everyone thought she dumped me for Rod, when we really had parted months earlier on very amicable terms. I'm never going to date another famous person again. It just got to be too much," he'd say. Despite the drama around the band, something the public often overlooked was just how talented the musicians who made up Winger were. Guitarist Reb Beach and Paul Taylor would be featured prominently in musical magazines, and drummer Rod Morgenstein would be repeatedly named as the best progressive rock drummer by Modern Drummer magazine. When it came time to record the group's follow-up album, In the Heart of the Young, the band went in a further progressive direction, but the label wasn't happy with the result. The label complained about a lack of radio-friendly songs and said they wouldn't support the record. So Winger had to retreat back into the studio and write several more songs, resulting in the singles Easy Come, Easy Go and Can't Get Enough. While In the Heart of the Young repeated the same success of the group's first album, it was now 1990 and Winger started to notice dwindling crowds on the road at their shows and their peers. Paul Taylor would recall in the same book, "By then we were into 1990? So we were starting to all notice like, wow, where's everybody at the shows? And where's our chart numbers? I remember it finally hit home in Cincinnati. We had a night off and I went to see Extreme and Cinderella with David Lee Roth and it was half full. I was like, whoa, something's up, because 2 years prior it would have been sold out." As Winger was about to learn, their fortunes were about to change. It was very unfortunate for the band as it came pretty late to the party. By 1991, heavy metal band Metallica released their juggernaut record, the Black Album. One of the hugely successful singles off the record was Nothing Else Matters, whose video featured the band's drummer Lars Ulrich throwing darts at a poster of Kip Winger. Kip would look back at the video saying, "I've got nothing against those guys, but the video didn't help me. I thought it was cheap and unfounded to a large degree. I don't think those guys can play a lot of our shit. I think they got some cool albums. Obviously they're huge. It was kind of like, hey everybody, we think these guys suck, so you should too." It wasn't just Metallica who took aim at the band, as MTV did as well. Winger had a complicated relationship with the network, as on one hand, Winger owed a lot of their success to MTV. Winger wouldn't release their third album until 1993, and by this point in time rock music had undergone a massive shift, with the type of music that Winger played becoming less and less popular as alternative rock was the flavor of the week. The members of Winger, by their own admission, were betting on their third album to be a huge hit. Guitarist Red Beach would admit that the band was getting big publishing advances ahead of releasing Pull, and jumping the gun, Beach bought an expensive new house and relocated his whole family to Florida. Pull wouldn't even sell 500,000 copies, meaning it didn't even go gold. Within 8 months of buying that house, Beach had to sell the property. But while the band's record sales dried up, they were still a big draw on the touring circuit, with Beach remembering the moment that changed everything on tour in the same book, going on to say, "We were on tour for Pull, selling 1,000 tickets a night in theaters. It was going really well. And this guy came on the bus and said, 'I gotta show you guys something.' Put on a Beavis and Butthead video, and when they hung the kid by his underwear on the tree in his Winger t-shirt, we all just looked at each other. I remember going, oh no, this could all be over. The day after it aired, nobody bought Winger tickets anymore. We had to cancel the tour." In a separate interview, Beach would also claim that DJs soon stopped playing the band's music. The character he was referring to on the show was Stuart, who was deemed one of the uncool kids as he wore a Winger shirt. Compared to the main characters of Beavis and Butthead who wore AC/DC and Metallica t-shirts, the show's message was simple: Winger was safe and uncool. The following year the band would split. Tragedy would strike 2 years later when Kip Winger's wife, Beatrice Richter, whom he married in 1991, was killed in an automobile accident. 5 years later, the band reformed for a brief stint in 2001, and they would permanently reform 5 years later in 2006, and put out a series of albums, with their most recent being 2014's Better Days Comin'. Outside of his self-titled band, Kip Winger would get into composing classical music for both orchestras and ballet. In fact, his work with the San Francisco Ballet Orchestra would earn him a Grammy in 2019. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like button and subscribe, and we'll see you again on Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.